Can the Seattle Seahawks make it work with a shaky and unproven offensive line in 2024? What's up, everybody? Good morning. Welcome back. We've got more Seattle Seahawk 2024 predictions to throw out there. And now we're going to do the offensive line, or really blocking in general, but mostly offensive line. Those are the guys who block 98% of the time, let's say. So we're going to take a look at some of the key players that are participating in blocking on the offense this year. So we're going to take a look at a slew of offensive linemen. They're obviously going to be the stars of the show. And then at the end, we'll do a little bit of work with tight end, and we'll do a little bit of work with the running backs. So this is definitely the area of the team that has some people concerned. This is definitely the area of the Seahawks' entire team, not just the offense, that has people thinking this could be a tough year, I think. The offensive line for the Seattle Seahawks is going into 2024 with a new offensive coordinator, new offensive line coach, at least that we know of 3 new pieces on the starting line, and a lot of question marks. You've got an aging veteran who looked relatively washed up last year at left guard. You've got a former 5th-round pick, second-year player who barely played last year at center. You've got, theoretically, a rookie who is a very exciting rookie, but a rookie nevertheless at right guard. And we don't totally know exactly how the depth is going to shake out. We may end up getting something we didn't expect. For all we know, Tomlinson doesn't win the left guard job. Oluwatimi might not win the center job, but no matter what happens, we're not going to necessarily feel great about this offensive line when the season starts. There are some pieces to it that I think are going to be very good, but there are also some pieces to it that need to stay healthy before we actually get good things out of it. So definitely some unknowns that we're working through here, and it's going to be difficult to quantify how good these guys will be because we have a quarterback who has proven to be very good at playing behind a bad offensive line, and we should have an offensive coordinator that understands how to work with a lackluster offensive line, but that doesn't mean there aren't going to be some frustrations. Before we get into the numbers, if you like this video, please click the thumbs up button down below, subscribe if you're new, hit the bell if you want notifications, consider joining the channel, just costs $2 a month, you get access to various perks. Let's dive in with the blockers. So, going to start on the left side with Charles Cross, and in most of these cases, I'm just going to assume these guys stay healthy. With one exception, I'm going to assume that these players stay relatively healthy, because once you start guessing about injuries, you really just kind of dive into the speculation zone where you're basically just throwing up random numbers at that point, and I don't really want to get into that. Like, that doesn't say anything about how good I think these players will be. Again, I think you get into murky waters when you're trying to speculate injuries for players who aren't known to be extremely injury prone. And while Cross did get hurt last year, I wouldn't consider him injury prone. So assuming he plays the whole season, I got penalties. We're going to go ahead and give him 4 penalties. Slight improvement over what he did the last couple years. Charles Cross, people forget this, was 21 years old in his rookie year. And when you're 21 and you're playing in the NFL, you should be making massive strides forward as a player over the next couple years by default. Last year, he probably just got pushed off his path by the injury, and I expect him to take those big steps forward this year, his 3rd year. He did play most of the season, by the way, last year. I want to be clear about that, but he was definitely not himself, and I was not I don't think I can hold what happened last year against him. So I'm expecting, in terms of sacks allowed, I ended up going with 4, which would be a little bit of an improvement over what he did as a rookie. I think that's completely reasonable. And then pressures, I went with 29, which again, that would not get him into that all-pro territory. Like, that's not Trent Williams. Trent Williams does much better than that. Guys like that, much better. but 29 pressures over a 17-game season or a 16-game season even, if you're going to assume he misses a game at some point, that's that's a good player. That's a player you're happy to have and a player that is doing his job. And it represents an improvement significantly over what he did as a rookie. If he cannot make this step forward this year to get to approximately this area, by the way, I'm using PFF pressure stats in this hypothetical, then we have to start wondering if this guy might just never get to where we thought he was going to get to. Because, again, as a 21-year-old rookie, you need to be a much better player when you get to that 23-year-old state. And for his run block grade, I went with 68.8. It'll be fine. I don't think he'll ever be a great run blocker. It's not his specialty, but he'll be pretty decent at it. Not expecting anything over the top crazy. And I'm not going to speculate on the backup because I don't know who it's going to be, but even if I did, I don't know how much he's going to play. All right, so that gets us to left guard where we have Laken Tomlinson, and I'll just say it. I don't really want Laken Tomlinson to be the guy, but everything I'm hearing from Seahawks training camp right now is that he's going to be the guy. They like his leadership. They like his veteran experience. They like how good, clean his injury history is. They like what he's done in the past, but I'm going to keep saying it. He looked like a different player last year. He just did. And he was playing on a terrible team with a really, really bad offense. Obviously, a rising tide lifts all boats, so being a part of a better offense should help him. But, I mean, he is an older player, and he was never mobile. He doesn't really fit what this offense is probably going to want. So this is not something that I'm excited to report, but I do think Tomlinson is going to be the starter, and I think it'll be hard to move him off of that because of all the extracurricular stuff he brings to the table besides just what he does on the football field. So I went with 3 penalties. He is a veteran. I think that he'll be able to keep the penalties down. He's playing on the interior. So I think he'll be able to keep things relatively clean there. But sacks, we get to this point, I went with 6, which for a left guard, that's not very good, but that's also kind of in line with what we saw from him last year. So I'm not super enthusiastic about him as a pass protector. Pressures, I went with 46, which is not terrible for a left guard if he plays all 17 games, but it does speak to the fact that we just really kind of cheaped out addressing the left guard position this offseason, unless we decide to do something a little creative like moving Haynes over to the left or Bradford over to the left. I think this is kind of the ceiling, honestly. Like, this could be worse. You're facing a lot of really good 3-techs when you're playing the left guard spot in the NFL right now. And run block grade, I went with 52.1. I don't really have high expectations here. He's old, and he's not mobile. If we ask him to do any of that move blocking stuff, he's going to look really bad. Like, worse than Damian Lewis. Not even close, I don't think. Especially at this age. And I think it's going to be another one of those things where there's some intangible stuff that he's bringing, but the tangibles are just bad. We've had a few players like that over the years. And given the fact that Laken Tomlinson never gets hurt, I didn't really say anything about a backup because if Tomlinson loses his job, it'll be because somebody behind him is doing much better than him. And I hope that happens, honestly, because that would be a great kick in the pants. But I don't feel like it's going to happen. I feel like they're going to just ride out the veteran because they trust him. Maybe that's more of a Pete Carroll philosophy. Maybe now that we don't have Pete Carroll, we won't be looking at things like that, but I don't know. Olu Oluwatimi, I am pretty high on here. I think we did a great job picking him a couple years ago. And now in what should be his first full year starting, I do think he will beat out Nick Harris. I went with 3 penalties. Even though he hasn't had a lot of NFL experience, he did build experience last year being part of the team as a backup. And he had so much playing experience in college that I do think he's relatively ready to go. So I'll just say 3 penalties, and I went with 2 sacks allowed. As a center, you're not giving up nearly as much in terms of pressures. There's just a lot less asked of you. You're going to do a lot of double team blocks. You're going to do a lot of combo blocks. You're going to do a lot of stuff that is a little bit lighter on responsibility as a pass protector. So in that light, I also went with 16 pressures, which might be a little bit low, but I don't think it's going to be critically low because, again, when you're a center, what you're being asked to do is often a little simpler. It's often a little bit more, well, I'm going to help this guy not get beat, rather than I'm going to take this guy on one-on-one. I need to pick up this blitzing linebacker. Stuff like that, which Oluwatimi should be pretty good at. And run block grade, I actually think is going to be a happy surprise. I went with 76.2. I think he'll be our best run blocker, and I think that he'll be somebody we're feeling pretty good about going forward after the 2024 season. And I went with no backup. Oluwatimi's never shown any propensity to get injured that I know of. Maybe there was a little bit of a ding last year, but I'm just going to go ahead and assume he plays basically the full season. All right, then we get to our rookie at right guard, Christian Haynes. Pretty excited about this one. I do like this pick. I do like this player a lot. But he is a rookie. And one thing that's notable is that last year, both of the high-profile right guards that went relatively early in the draft, Osiris Torrance and Cody Mock, both actually played very poorly last year. So even though you would have assumed that they would have just been plug and play, neither guy was well regarded last year. So I'm not assuming that just because it's an easier position, it's going to be great. But I do think it'll be pretty good. I'm high on this guy. I like the experience that he has playing the position. So with Christian Haynes, I went with 5 penalties. I'm sure that as a rookie, you're going to have some jitters. You're going to have some moments where you just mess up because you're not totally comfortable yet. And you just jump a little early or you grab somebody. He does get a little bit grabby sometimes anyway. So 5 penalties. But 4 sacks, which honestly, given the fact that he's a right guard taking on 1 techs and 0 techs mostly, that might be high. He didn't give up hardly anything in college. So it wouldn't surprise me if it's a little better than that. I'm going to play it safe and say 4. And then I'm also going to say 35 pressures. I want to go lower for both numbers because I think he'll be good. But I was looking at some of the other high-profile right guards that were in the rookie class last year. So I'm trying to curb my... I don't want to get too high on a guy and then have everybody be disappointed when he doesn't live up to the high expectations. I would only do that if I really, really feel good about him living up to it. And then run block rate, I think, will be fine. It'll be 61.1, like league average, fine, whatever. Didn't really have anything for a backup. And that gets us to our last and final guy on the offensive line, the right tackle, Abraham Lucas, who probably should be our best offensive lineman this year. Question is, how much is he going to play? I think he'll play a good chunk of the season, but I will admit the only thing we can do logically, the only thing we can do that makes any sense at all is assume that Lucas misses some time. If he plays all 17 games, we have to consider that a miracle. That being said, in the time he does play, I went with 4 penalties. I think he'll be able to clean things up a little bit compared to his rookie year where he was quite a good player. I went with 6 sacks allowed, which sounds like a lot, but for a right tackle, I don't really think that it is. You're facing some of the scariest pass rushers in the league when you're playing at right tackle. So I think that the reasonable expectation is that he does give up some stuff. It's just not going to be as much as he gave up his rookie year. I think it was like 8 or 9 sacks that year. Pressures, however, I went with only 21, which again would be an improvement over what he did as a rookie. And I think it's only natural that we expect these players improve on what they did as a rookie. So I kind of went with the opposite of Cross here, where I had him giving up more sacks but less pressures, which is relatively consistent with what he did, with what they both did as a rookie. And it also reflects the fact that I just don't think Lucas will play the whole season. And run block grade, I said 71.2, which is a small improvement over last year. It just kind of a whatever thing. 71.2 would be good. We wouldn't be crazy excited about it, but Lucas is another guy who's mainly a pass protector, and I think he'll be protecting against the pass rushers very well. Now, I do have some stuff here for George Fant, because it would shock me if George Fant didn't play this year. He might start several games. And I think he'll be okay. I think he'll be a decent stopgap, but he is a little bit older. There is some slippage here for sure. So I don't see anything great here. But I also don't think he's going to play a ton. I'm going to be relatively optimistic about the Abe Lucas stuff. So I went with just the 1 penalty. He's a veteran. He should be able to keep it clean there. Allows 1 sack, allows 5 pressures, and has a run block grade of 57.4. Very anonymous, very forgettable, very whatever. But He'll fill in maybe 1 or 2 games. I'll go like 3. Let's say George Fant starts 3 games. And I think that's pretty workable. I think we'll be able to live with that. So that's the offensive line. That's all I had for these guys. Tight ends. Tight ends, let's take a look. This matters as well. First, we have Noah Fant. Obviously, you don't want to be using Noah Fant as a blocker very much, but that doesn't mean you'll never use him as a blocker. He's going to have to do it some. And I had him committing 3 penalties, which roughly consistent with what he did last year. I think we'll be asking more of him this year, so it could go up to like 4. But also remember that him as a receiver is going to be susceptible to committing other kinds of penalties that some of these other players that we've looked at here, these offensive linemen, won't be, like offensive pass interference. So 3 penalties. I have him allowing 1 sack. It'll happen at some point. I have him allowing 3 pressures. I don't think we're going to ask him to block that much, so I don't think it's going to be anything crushing. And run block grade 62.2. Just, again, kind of whatever. It's not significant, but it's going to happen. And then our backup tight end is, of course, Pharaoh Brown. He's the guy we brought in to block. So I think we'll mostly keep him within that lane. And in that lane, I think he'll do very well. I did say 1 penalty, but I went with 0 sacks allowed and just 2 quarterback pressures allowed. That should be relatively consistent with what he was able to do in previous years as a blocker. 65.9 run block grade. Not expecting anything great there, but he'll be good enough. It won't be like last year with some of the stuff we were able to do with Disley and to a certain extent Parkinson, but it'll work. It'll be good enough for what we need to do. Remember, we're going to be probably a 11 personnel heavy team this year. Finally, the running backs. This one's tough. Walker, I think, is okay as a blocker. I said 2 penalties. Again, he's a running back, so he's going to be susceptible to penalties that the offensive lineman won't be. 0 sacks allowed, and I said 2 pressures. He'll have a few opportunities to do it. 56.2 run block grade, not going to be a meaningful part of what he does in 2024. And then our backup running back, Charbonnet, he's probably going to do a little more blocking than Walker because he's better at it, and I think he's a better third down back. So 1 penalty for Charbonnet, just going to pick up a random one at some point this year. 1 sack allowed and 3 pressures allowed. I think he'll be a better blocker than Walker, but that's just because he's going to be doing it much more. He'll still allow a little bit more. 61.2 run block rate, again, not particularly meaningful. And that gives you the totals, which don't necessarily mean anything, especially this run block grade. Let me just get rid of that. And yeah, that's the way I see it. Now, I want to be very clear here. This doesn't necessarily reflect how good I think the offensive line will be. It reflects how well I think this team will deal with handling the offensive line that they have. See you guys later. Go Hawks.